Hello, I am Abby from Abby's Bookish Life, and today I have my beautiful friend Lydia. She is here today to talk with me about the book The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. We would like to preface this video by saying we read this book about a month ago. Of course, we both work in the school system, so back to school has pushed this video back a little bit. So if we sound like we don't know what we're talking about, it's probably because the book is not fresh in our minds. But we're excited to talk about it. I'll start by telling you what the book is about with no spoilers, just a brief synopsis. It's a thriller, and it's about a woman named Anna who is trapped in her house because she has agoraphobia, so she's afraid to go outside. And she believes that she saw something happen, but she also is drinking heavily and like mixing up her drugs that she's also not supposed to be taking with alcohol. So she's not a very reliable narrator. So it's kind of just about her life in this house, watching her neighbors, and she thinks she sees a crime, but you as the reader are kind of unsure about what's going on. So, Lydia, you start by telling me what you thought about it.
Oh gosh, just my thoughts. I absolutely love it.
Great. So if you had to give it like 1 to 5 stars, what would you give it?
Honestly, I would give it 5 stars. It's my favorite thriller that I've ever read. I haven't read many. I'm more into like the cozy mystery, feel good types of books. But as for thrillers, I absolutely loved it. It kept me on my toes. And like you said, knowing that Anna is mixing alcohol with those really high-level prescription drugs, you never know what to believe. And there's so many nuggets of information. And I listened to the book and recommended it to Abby and then reread it so I could do this talk. So going back and rereading it again, there's even more nuggets of goodness that are just, it makes it so much better. So I would recommend reading it twice, honestly, because it was a lot more interesting the second time, even though it was great the first time too.
Yeah, this was the first time I read it. And I don't normally reread thrillers because I'm always like, will it still be good because I already know the twist. Although now that I think about it, I don't really remember a lot of the twists from like thrillers that I read more than a couple months ago.
I would recommend it.
It might be cool. I'll have to come back to it in the future. I also gave it 5 stars. I really liked it. I think that it was different from things that I've read before because I didn't know what to believe. Whereas normally you can like, even with some unreliable narrator things like thrillers, you can still kind of be like, well, I believe her though, you know, it's like you normally believe the narrator anyway. And with this, I truly was like, I don't know if I believe what she saw actually happened.
Are we allowed to give spoilers now? I want to ask before I talk about one.
So this video, for all of you watching who have not read this book, it will be filled with spoilers because we cannot have a deep talk without spoilers. So now that you've heard our general thoughts, if you haven't read the book, please click away or keep watching. You can spoil it for yourself. Doesn't matter. But there will be spoilers from this point on. So go. Spoil away.
So on the part about not knowing whether or not you can believe her, there's parts in the book, so you know when her neighbor comes over, she does the drawing. Yes. But then when she's trying to prove her neighbor is there, she doesn't ever go show it or find it. And I'm like, why? Like, you have the drawing, just show them. Yes. You know it's there. This is proof someone's there. But she doesn't show it until way later when she's trying to prove it. So that's one of the moments where you're like, okay, does she know it's not real? Does she subconsciously realize this never happened? I don't have proof. But then you get later and she does bring it out. So the whole time I'm just like, wait a minute, is she?
And every time anything, not even just with the murder, like everything in her life is discounted where you're like, oh wait, she's actually like mentally ill. Like she's mentally unstable and is going through something extremely traumatic. So yeah, maybe she did like make this up. or like not make it up. Like I didn't ever believe she was like doing it for attention, because
Right.
that's kind of implied at some points. Like some of the other characters are like, oh, she's just lonely and wants attention. I didn't ever believe that, but I truly thought that she maybe hallucinated.
Right. And that's why I said maybe subconsciously. At points I was like, maybe subconsciously she knows it's not true, but she can't divide between what's reality and what wasn't, since she's been mixing all those drugs and
Yes.
alcohol and double dosing and all that.
Oh, it's so, I think that's what makes it so special, is that it's not like other like normal unreliable narrator ones where you have a character that drinks a lot, or something like that, where you're like, oh, well, they were drunk, so maybe they didn't see something correctly, or they were drinking, so they didn't see something clearly. But this is like, she is going through it, and you don't know what she's seeing or what she's experiencing.
Right.
Have you ever read The Girl on the Train?
I have not.
I read it a long time ago. I don't remember really anything about it, except that it was one where she was an unreliable narrator, where she drank all the time and she witnessed a crime. Like the train was going past a house and she saw someone like getting murdered in the house. And then she like gets herself invested, but by the time she gets there, people are like, nope, don't have any idea what you're talking about. And so this reminded me of that, except this has like an extra element of something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked it. It's hard to like compare it to any other thriller, but I'd say it's probably like it's like a domestic thriller, like a psychological thriller, because it messes with your mind and it involves a lot of psychology. But it's domestic because she's in her house like essentially the whole time.
Right.
There's like one setting for this book and it's her house.
Yeah. Which honestly, so talking about that made me think, when I was reading it, the title, The Woman in the Window, at the beginning, she's spying on her neighbors. So like when I first started reading it for the first time, I thought it was going to be about her neighbor who she's seen having this affair. Yes, or maybe it's going to be about the different women she watches. But then as the story goes, you're like, well, maybe she's the woman in the window because she's stuck in her house and it's talking about herself. But then there's also the woman in the window that she sees get murdered. So I'm like, okay, this title is about all of the things. And I thought that was really clever of the author to pick a title that, as the story progressed, I'm like, wait, this is why the title is what it is. But then it changes as the story goes on.
So let's talk about her spying on all of her neighbors.
Yes.
That's something that's kind of like, it starts the story, and that's kind of the thing that like opens the like gateways for her to see this murder happen, is that she's kind of like a peeping Tom. Like she's looking in on everybody's life and like judging them.
Yes.
Which I think is really funny. Coming from like a character who can't leave her house and is like really lonely, but she still has access to a phone and like a cell phone that she doesn't use. She clearly wants that connection with other people, but she's just spying on them. I thought that was interesting. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm a people watcher. I'll admit it. I love watching people and like thinking, oh, like I wonder what they do for a living or all these things. But she also has the added dimension of she knows them from before. She talks about her neighbors who had the house party, and she knows these people and what they do and their things about their lives. So I think it's interesting because now it's almost like she's broken that barrier between that friendship or that neighborhood feel, and now she's going into their private lives, like the one with the affair. And it's just like, okay, sometimes it's a little too far for me and I felt like uncomfortable. Like, how do you keep watching that? But it's also like, you can't look away.
Yes.
But yeah, it's very interesting to me how that's, and then like you said, she's almost judging them for, oh, are they gonna do this? When she, she can't leave her house, she can't make those connections. The book club is another, I'm sure she could do an online book club. She talks about getting on the internet and wanting to be a part of something like that, but she doesn't use that resource. So it is interesting.
Well, and she's like observing, like the case of the like neighbors having an affair is a great one, because she's watching everything happen, but she's not really like taking a stance on anything. Like she's she basically she's seen this like wife have an affair every day, and at one point the husband like almost comes home and catches her but doesn't. And like at any of those moments she could have like picked up the phone and been like, or like opened the window and been like, hey, she has a man in there, but she doesn't. She just takes like an observer stance, which was I thought that really stuck with me as like a part of her character. Like she was very much an observer and like she was lonely but didn't want to like interact with these people.
Yeah, which is also interesting knowing what her profession was. So she's
Yes.
a psychologist who is trained to observe, but also delve in, like, why is this happening? How can I help you work through this?
Yes.
So it's kind of like now in her personal life that observer has stayed with her.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about her profession a little bit, because she gets online and is giving people with agoraphobia like psychological help. Like she's being an online counselor for people essentially. But she's not honest. Like she doesn't tell them that she has agoraphobia. And so for me, which there's always that saying about how like people who go into mental health are doing it because like they want to help the people that are struggling with the things that they're struggling with. Like, oh, like if you are like a counselor, it's because you were crazy or like you had something. Right. And so I thought that was really interesting that she has agoraphobia. She's not telling them that she does or that she has any experience in this. She's essentially pretending that she doesn't.
Yeah. And then, well, that's with most of them. And then she's giving advice on like the medications and things like that too. Like, oh, you should try this. When in reality, she's not following any of it. And she knows, she knows it. So it's so frustrating.
Yes, too. And she keeps saying like, oh, I know I shouldn't, like, I'm not supposed to take this, but I am.
Yeah, but then too, I think we need to talk about Granny Lizzie, who she does tell about her agoraphobia. That twist, hello, another huge spoiler.
That twist, okay, so Granny Lizzie, she's talking to her online. She's basically is like, for some reason, this is the one person that she's like, I'm going to tell this random person online that I have agoraphobia and I have all these struggles. And I thought from like maybe like the third time that she talked to Granny Lizzie, I was like, Granny Lizzie is suspect. I don't know who she is. I don't know how she's connected. But I
trusted her.
I didn't trust her. However, I didn't see where it was going. And I thought it was really funny. So like when you find out who Granny Lizzie was, the person who it was like, oh, well, I didn't even, like, I was just doing it to like get to know you and like get more information about you. And he's like, but you gave me your whole life story. And I was like, oh, dang.
Yeah, I trusted Granny Lizzie. I was like, this is her person. This is just going to get her through her agoraphobia, through all her past trauma. Like, this is great for her. And then when it wasn't a real granny, I was so shocked. I was so mad.
Listen, I thought it was still going to be an old lady. I don't know who I thought it was. I thought it was going to be an old lady still, like an evil granny. But that's the danger of the internet is like, because the internet is essentially the same. Like you're observing. You don't have to be honest. You don't have to interact if you don't want to. It's like you're fully disconnected.
Yeah. And
so it was easier to do that and trust some random person she didn't know.
Yeah, for sure.
So the talking to Granny Lizzie is how we find out about why Anna has agoraphobia. Did you see that coming, or was that a full shock to you?
Okay, so I had no idea.
Hold on, I'll spoil it for everyone.
Okay, you start with it, yeah.
So the reason Anna has agoraphobia is because she was in a horrible car accident. She and her husband, I'll give you the whole tea on Anna's life. She and her husband asked for a divorce, and he wanted to take their daughter, or he wanted to tell their daughter that they were getting a divorce. And Anna said, no, let's like go on this trip together and like we'll be a happy family at least one more time. But I don't want to tell her right now. So they go on this trip in the middle of winter and they get in this huge fight. their daughter finds out, like, while they're at this hotel that they're getting a divorce. She gets mad. She doesn't want to go on vacation. She wants to go home. So Anna drives her husband and her daughter. They're driving back home, and they get in a car accident. And the car accident doesn't immediately kill anybody, but they basically fall off this cliff and are trapped there in the snow, and her husband and daughter slowly die around her, like, while she survives, and she has no cell service, and then they're out there for days, and so the weight of the world and, like, the sky above her, just, like, that's what stuck with her after the death of her family. So she couldn't go outside or look at the sky or do anything like that because there was too much space, which I thought was interesting, that the amount, because normally when you hear about agoraphobia, it's that there's not enough space. Like, they don't like to be in crowds of people. You don't like to feel trapped, but she felt trapped by, like, the enormity of the world. Oh, and I forgot, the reason they were getting a divorce is she was having an affair
with her coworker.
A coworker at this, like, psychology office. So those twists honestly got me more than, like, the big who was, like, what happened in the murder twists.
And the accident was caused because while she was driving home in the snow, her lover texted her, and I'm pretty sure her husband was like, I bet that's him. So she looked down at her phone and the accident happened. But yes, I too agree that those shocks, when I found out, so that's how we got to this. You asked me how I felt about the big twist when she tells Granny Lizzie that her husband and daughter aren't just living elsewhere, they're actually dead. I was so shocked. I did not see that coming at all, because she talks about having a home phone and she talks about having a cell phone. So I just assume when she's like, guess who, that she had made a phone call. Like, I never in my wildest dreams thought she was imagining it all.
Well, and the narration style is so disconnected. Like, it's not ever clear. Like, the whole story, none of it's clear. So you just make assumptions.
Right.
Then AJ Finn is like, just kidding. You thought she was making a phone call? No, she's just talking to the ghosts of her family. And the fact, and I think that was added in at the perfect moment, because I really was, like, 100% on her side that this murder happened.
Yes.
She saw it. And then that part came in, and you find out that she's been, like, talking to her daughter and husband, and they're not even alive. Like, she's been talking to the ghosts of them, basically. And,
yeah,
like,
and she
reading them.
And she tells people that she never says they're alive, but she says they don't live with me anymore.
Yes.
So we're led to assume, okay, something happened where they separated, and we think, or at least I thought, it was because of the agoraphobia.
Yes, and he does, because he says, which now I want to go back and read and, like, analyze what he said in the phone calls. Or in the phone calls, because I clearly remember him being like, oh, you know, we can't come see you. Like, this is helpful for you. Like, us being away is going to, like, help you.
Yeah.
So now I'm like, oh my gosh. She's like, she is imagining her dead husband and daughter.
Yes. But yeah, so you didn't see it coming either?
No.
Okay.
At one point I was like, I felt like something, again, was fishy was going on. I also read a lot of thrillers. So sometimes I can be like, oh, this is mentioned, like, one too many times for it to be normal.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know if, like, maybe the husband was, like, involved in some way in this murder, and, like, that's why we never saw him, is because, like, I knew something with the husband was not right. And then she started talking about how they had this car accident, and I was like, oh!
Right.
No!
And they never said, like, when she first talks about the car accident, I'm like, okay, well, did they survive and then just get the divorce?
Yeah.
But then you find out later, because Granny Lizzie logs off, so you don't ever hear, like, the full story at once, and then you're like, okay, so what? Oh, yeah.
She says she does, like, physical therapy for her, because she's like, oh, this car accident I was in. So then I kept thinking, oh, she has agoraphobia because she was in a car accident. And I was like, yeah, that, like, trauma can cause, like, mental breaks. Like, that is probably what happened.
Yeah.
But then I never guessed.
For sure. Because I thought it was, like, car accident. She is recovering from this car accident. She starts drinking and all this. And her husband's like, this isn't a safe environment for our daughter. We can't live here. It's not good. You need to, you know, work on yourself before we can be together again. Like, that's where my mind was.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which was not correct.
No. Well, then I kept thinking, like, oh, I hope this ends with her, like, getting her family back.
Yeah.
And, like, that's not how it ends. But then, no. So how did you feel about the ending? Was it, like, satisfying to you? How did you feel about it?
Okay. So I'm trying to remember, because I know there's, like, a part that does, like, 6 weeks later. And honestly, I don't really remember, other than I know she starts doing walks outside with, like, Bina, which is her physical therapist and things like that. So I know she's starting to recover more.
That's pretty much the end of the 6 weeks is just her going outside.
Right. But are you talking about, like, the big ending when we find out who actually did the murder?
Sure. Just in general, like, did you think it was satisfying, or were you left like...
I thought, yes. Okay. I loved the ending because I didn't see it coming at all. I was totally on Ethan's side the whole time. Same. So do you want to, like, give another synopsis of the spoiler? Okay.
Other spoiler synopsis. So Ethan is we've been talking about how she sees this murder. So this family moves in across the street. She spies on them moving in. The wife, Jane. The wife, Jane, she comes over to, like, drop off, I don't know, brownies or, like, a bag of something or whatever. And she stays, she drinks with Anna. They, like, bond a little bit, which is what we mentioned earlier, the picture. So Anna is an artist, so she, like, draws a picture of her. And then basically they just have this evening together. It's just one, but she is like, hey, I really like this woman. Well, then she sees this woman get murdered, or she thinks she sees this woman get murdered. And the son, Ethan, that lives over there, he comes over and, like, kind of starts making Anna concerned about, like, the dad being abusive. And so then Anna's like, oh, the dad did it. Like, the dad is, like, he killed his wife, and Ethan's in danger. And so she kind of, like, takes Ethan in and, like, takes care of him, gives him, like, Ethan comes over and, like, cries a couple times. So you're like, oh, Ethan. But that's the whole story with Ethan. Well, and then I forgot to say, the reason that nobody believes this murder happens is because the next day, the day after the murder, they're like, that's not Jane. Like, this is his wife, Jane, and it's a woman
alive and breathing.
Yeah, she's alive, breathing. Like, no one she's ever met is not the woman that came over. And so they're basically pretending that this other woman that she saw get murdered doesn't exist at all. So that's the synopsis of what is happening with Ethan. Oh, and then later, the whole big plot twist is that the first Jane was not Jane. It was Ethan's birth mother.
Right.
And Ethan killed her because I don't even remember why. I just remember
he has psychological issues as well. We find out later.
Yeah, you find out that, like, his dad has been trying to, like, shield everybody from Ethan. Like,
he's homeschooled, things like that. But yeah, so we find out that he also has psychological, which he taunts Anna about. He says, like, oh, you didn't know, and you're a child psychologist, all this. But he's pretty much saying that his biological mom was trash, and he didn't want her around, but she kept trying to come see him.
Yep.
So he got angry, kills her.
Yes. And then the dad, like, helps cover it up.
Right.
And so that's why the dad is like, no, that woman never existed. Because that part threw me off.
Yeah.
Where I was like, well, but why? Like, the dad is pretending she didn't exist. So I thought the dad did it. I was like,
it makes him look so guilty the whole time. And that's why that's great writing on the author's part, because the whole time, the way he's acting, the things he's saying, it makes you just fall into, okay, I'm on Anna's side. He definitely did it. He's this abusive father that killed his wife.
And he comes over and he like chokes her at that one point.
Yeah.
He like physically attacks her and is like, stay away from Ethan, stay away from my wife, stay away from my family. And so I was like, oh, he did it.
Yes, for sure. But then we find out, like you said later, he does all this because he's protecting Ethan.
Yes.
Who is actually a murderer.
A crazy murderer who then is like, oh, well, I've been watching you because like I'm gonna murder you.
Yeah, and you find out, so like a couple other things, like twists that I didn't even know were twists, where I think Punch is the name, Punch is the name of her cat, and at some point his leg gets hurt. She doesn't know what happened. She thinks he just fell. And another point, she's like, oh, my phone lock code is not working. That's weird. I must have done it when I was drunk.
The
like
phone code.
Yeah. So these things you think are just like, oh, it's because she's drunk. She doesn't know what's going on. She has blackouts because she double doses on meds.
Yeah.
Right. And then you find out Ethan comes over, like, you've done too much. You know too much. I've been watching you while you sleep. I changed your passcode.
I'm Granny Lizzie. Like, I know all your stuff.
And then I totally forgot to just have the picture. So at one point in the book, yes, she gets emailed from guess who, and it says Jane Russell. So she thinks it's this woman, his wife.
The wife.
It's a picture of her sleeping. So she thinks it's a taunt from Alistair's wife, saying like, hey, don't mess with us. We can get into your house. And again, it was Ethan who logged into her own account to take the picture, to send the picture, and he knew to put guess who because he was Granny Lizzie, and she told Granny Lizzie about how she talked to her family, which is also dead. Just all the this is sort of like the nuggets. The nuggets you recognize too when you're reading. You see things so much clearer. But anyway, so yes, the ending when Ethan's like telling all these things that were actually him, and it explains so many weird details you didn't even think about.
Yes.
So that's why I love the ending. It was super satisfying for me because I was like, ooh, it's all explained. We all see it here. Yes. And then it even ties back to the leaky roof with the skylight. Like, it even ties back to that. Yes. And, I loved it. I loved how everything just, like, melds together.
Yeah, and I loved that, like, the roof used to be her happy place. And, like, she had this garden up there. And she hadn't gone up since the accident because she couldn't bear to like go up on the roof where there was so much space. Like her agoraphobia stopped her from going on the roof. But then like the roof is what saved her, and the fact that she didn't tend to the garden because it became so like overgrown that she could stand to go up there and like be up there and not like panic. But also I feel like this is the point, the leaky roof makes me think about the guy, what was his name?
David, the tenant.
The tenant.
He's a whole other storyline.
Yes. Okay, so we haven't talked at all about him, but I thought he did it at one.
I did too. Same.
Because she mentions early on. So he's her tenant. He lives in her basement, and he like takes care of the handiwork around the house. She finds a box cutter that like
he borrowed. Yeah.
He borrows a box cutter. This woman gets murdered. All of a sudden, the box cutter shows back up in her closet, and she's like, "Oh." No. And then she sees earrings that are exactly like the ones that the original Jane was wearing. Jane, who got murdered, Jane was wearing when she came over. And so Anna's like, and he has them like on his bedside table. And so Anna's like, oh my gosh, he killed her. And you find out that he did sleep with her, which is great. Like he has all these things because she slept with him and then she went and got murdered.
Yeah, which also, can we talk about, this is the one part of the story. I'm like, did it need to be in there? I don't really, when her and David ended up like getting together, I was like, I feel like that's not realistic because she held so tight on to her husband and daughter. I felt like it didn't fit, and that kind of broke the illusion a little bit, especially reading it the second time.
Yeah.
Like, all of a sudden, okay, now she's sleeping with this man in her daughter's bed. Like, that's not something a woman who is trying so hard and, like, longing for her family to be back. So that part, I don't know. What did you think?
I mean, I didn't think a whole lot about it when I was reading it, but I think part of it is because I think it's tying it back to like the fact that she did have an affair, and like
True.
she's kind of like, well, I'm already like, I think she's already blaming herself so much that it's like, well, how can I make myself, because her whole thing is like she's self-deprecating, like she is taking a whole bunch of drugs willy-nilly, she's drinking a lot to forget because she feels so much guilt about what happened. And so I think that having sex with her tenant in her dead daughter's bed is like the thing. Like, can you think of anything more like shocking?
Yeah, that's true.
I think it was like, I'm already a bad person, like this is what bad people do, like I'm gonna embrace it. And I also think she felt so like unheard, and everyone thought she was crazy, and everyone is like, nobody believes you. And he was so straightforward and like, yeah, like you could be right, I guess. And like I think that was enough, honestly, for her to be like, okay, great,
let's go.
like, I'm in.
That's true. Yeah, I get that. I don't know. When I just thought that, I don't know, that was the only part of the whole book that I was like,
well,
I don't know.
Wasn't he in jail before?
Which like, she didn't find out till later, and that's when he ends up moving out because she like kind of freaked out on him.
I think that them sleeping together was like, that was the thing that later made it more shocking that she like turned him in like that, where she was like, well, he had a box cutter and her earrings and was in jail once. And
right, for assault.
Yeah, you're like, wow, you just really sold him out like that without any evidence.
Yeah.
I mean, she thought she had evidence, but she was wrong.
Now, at any point, because I will say, for like a split second, did you think the physical therapist, Bina, had anything to do with it?
I don't know. I don't think I did. I mean, I definitely, like any character that's added into a thriller, I'm always like, ooh, they brought this person in, like they absolutely had something to do with it. But for me, I think she was so like minor of a character. Like I don't even know how I feel about Bina.
Well, that's why I think that's why I thought it might be her for a second, because I was like, okay.
Yeah.
The father's too obvious, although I really think it's him.
Yep.
I don't want it to be David. Like, for some reason, I was on his side, even though, like, he doesn't really get the best rep in the book. Like, he's a playboy. He's not very nice to Anna and all these things. But for some reason, I was like, there's got to be something. Like, something here. Like, she comes and goes from her house. Like, she's playing into her delusions almost. And she's like, yes, it was Alistair. So then part of me is like, okay, is it really you? Like, are you really some like notorious serial killer that goes into people's houses?
That's really interesting. I didn't question her at all, but like I absolutely should have, because she's the one that like Anna calls and like, I need to tell you about this murder I saw. So it definitely would have like made sense if she was involved.
And I think that's why too, because I was like, oh, we don't know it, like we barely know anything. It's gotta be like there's gonna be a huge twist at the end with her.
I think that's what's great about this thriller, is that literally anybody could have done it. There was a point where I was like, I bet Anna killed her.
Yeah, I thought that too. Like, she's so, but then part of me was like, okay, but based on how her like actual physical response to going to the outdoors, I was like, how could she have gotten over there? And then part of me was like, well, maybe she was on her way back when they found her and had to take her to the hospital.
Yeah.
But just seeing how like they described all her other experiences going outside of the house, I was like, I feel like it probably would have been more likely that she just imagined the entire thing.
Right. Which at some points, like I said, you're truly like, I bet she imagined this whole thing. Yeah. And like the twist is going to be like, she goes insane and like does something crazy.
Yeah. Which I think that's too, like, I know we talked about this at the very beginning, but being an unreliable narrator, I also wanted to believe her because I knew she was a psychologist and she has such a high level degree.
Yes.
I'm like, well, she's very educated. Like, I want to believe her, but
Mhm.
also she's so educated yet still making these terrible choices.
Yes.
It
Well,
was
and
so
then
frustrating.
she goes from being this character of like, you want to trust her, but also you're like, she's an, like, you kind of judge her a little bit. Like, I think that people, you're like, okay, well, why are you not taking, she's like, oh, I want to get better, I want to leave the house, but then she doesn't take her medicine correctly, and she doesn't, and she drinks like large amounts of alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're kind of like, do you even want to leave your house? But once it, like I said, once it gets to like what caused her agoraphobia, then you're just like, wow, okay, so she's dealing with a ton of trauma.
Right. And that,
It's so, it changes, and then you're just like sad for her, and you're like, well, maybe she is like hallucinating it because she's hallucinating her husband and child,
right.
like, is not mentally well.
I know too, and that's part two, you know, you're so mad, like, why are you drinking so much? But then also you have to take a step back, like both of us, especially with our backgrounds,
Yes.
like we know, well, alcoholism and like substance abuse, along with other mental disorders, is very common.
Yes.
So like, although I was like so mad the whole time, like, why are you doing this? You know better. I'm also like, well, you know,
Well,
she
I think
also,
what bothered me is just that her therapist kept calling and being like, hey, did you take your medicine today? Hey, make sure you're not drinking alcohol with us. And she's like, okay, I'm not. I was
right.
like, gosh, darn it, Anna.
Come on. Which you would think, because her doctor comes to her house and the whole time it talks about her leaving bottles, leaving glasses, like everywhere. And she has the case of wine because she orders it in bulk in her kitchen. How does the doctor never see it too? That's part of me. I'm like, Dr. Fielding, come on. Like, do a better home visit.
Yeah. I feel like this whole book is just a really interesting look at like what it feels like to be like the crazy woman, and like how if you have one thing in your life that like makes you unreliable, nobody will believe you, even if you like witnessed a full murder, like you saw
Right.
something get stabbed, like they didn't even investigate, they just went
Right.
over and like, not even when the police showed up because she called 911, they didn't even go to the house.
Right. Why?
Because she was a crazy woman.
They knew. Lived in a home.
Like, yes, and they were like, oh, they probably looked up who called and like looked up her name, and they were like, oh, she's crazy, and discounted everything she was saying just because she had like this trauma in her life. But I think that that's something that happens in society. It's like, if you have one thing,
yeah,
like, oh, you were drunk, well then you don't, like, your account isn't accurate.
right.
Or like you have a mental illness, so like your account isn't
right.
accurate. I just thought that it was a really, like, I felt for her the whole time, like, oh my gosh, what, like, can you imagine witnessing something so horrible and like doing the worst thing she can imagine, which is to leave the house to go help, and then basically be told you made it all up and that you're crazy.
Right.
Oh, it's just so like, that idea to me made it such an intense, and like the best part of the thriller was that like fear of not being believed.
Right. Well, and then too, we've already talked about like part of you is like, I don't really believe her either, but the other part is like, I want this to be true for her because of everything you just said.
Yeah, well, and I think that if it had turned out that she did make it all up, I don't think it would be as popular of a book.
Right. I agree. I totally agree.
Because then it would be like, oh, well, she's a crazy woman. Whereas now it's like, okay, even if you have all these things that are going against you, you can still like make it past and like still be believed. Like you can still be a reliable person.
Yeah. Well, and I will say the one officer, I think is like Detective Little was his name, the male officer.
Yeah, I think so.
He did do a little bit better with like trying to make, he almost like he wanted to believe her, but he couldn't because his profession doesn't allow it without the evidence, without, you know, more substantial proof. But and then the woman officer, ugh, I did not like her. She was mean.
Her. Oh, she was
least favorite character.
I disliked her more than I disliked Ethan.
Right. Honestly, well, because part of me too is like, okay, well, Ethan is a child with a mental disorder. So, like, yes, he murdered his biological mother, and, like, yes, that's a terrible, awful thing. But I'm also the person who watches Criminal Minds and, like, oh, like, they can't help that they have this mental disorder. Like, we need to help them.
Well,
Like,
and
it's such a weird, and he's a child, too.
he's
So it's like,
an actual child, and he's very manipulative, but she knows how, like, she uses her child psychology stuff to find out, like, what is his, like, weakness, basically.
right. That whole end.
It was so intense, and it was just so good.
Yeah.
Like, I don't even know what else there is to talk about because it was just, there's so many twists. Every
Right.
time you thought you had, like, figured it out, something else happened.
And I'm sure there are more that we can't even, like, we
Oh.
don't even remember.
I'm sure that there is.
It's just, oh, yeah.
Have
Read
you
the
ever
book.
seen,
That's all I
have
have
you
to
ever
say is
seen
read
the
the book.
movie? Have you ever seen the movie?
Not, have you?
Mm-mm. I want to go watch it now. I know, we need to go have a movie night so we can see what happens. If it's the same, I'm assuming it would just be the same, but sometimes they change stuff.
Yeah, that would be interesting. We should have done that before this. Oh well, because then we could compare. Maybe we'll do a second video.
Keep your eyes peeled, ladies and gentlemen. One might be coming.
Who knows? We'll see if we can ever find the time again with school.
Honestly, working and recording videos is a lot.
I know. I don't even do more than one, and I'm like, whoop, all right, here we go.
You're like, oh gosh, gotta squeeze this into my schedule.
Right.
Well, I'm glad you did. Thank you all if you have stuck around to listen to us talk about the window. Hopefully you've read it and could feel our feelings with us, because I think it's like one of the most popular thrillers out there. So I think most people react the same way. But let me know in the comments below if you had the same reactions, if you have different reactions. Let us know how you feel. Thank you, Lydia, for joining me today.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. That's going to be all for us. So I will see you all in my next video. Bye, friends.